When we dig deeper and expose the stories and identities of each other, there's so much to celebrate and talk about. And that, beyond what book banners might say, that's what we're getting to.
Welcome to Reclaimed Personas. I'm Philippe Charles. In this podcast, I speak with Black folks building dynamic personal brands that center their identities. With the help of digital media, they're seizing control of their own professional narratives in their own voice.
My voice is more important than the notion of who I am. Reclaim personas. Reclaim personas.
In this episode of Reclaimed Personas, I speak with the Tutu Teacher herself, Vera Ahiyya. She's been teaching kindergarten and first grade for over 15 years and recently became a published children's book author. Her online journey began almost serendipitously. She was just doing her job, trying to show up for her students by helping them be seen in the books they were reading, helping them understand each other's differences, helping them understand things like race and injustice. In our conversation, she talks about how Black women have helped shape her career and how the word rebellious can be appropriate when talking about children's books, and how she got that nickname, Tutu Teacher. Here's my interview with Vera Ahiyya. All right, Vera, thank you so much for joining me. And I really want to get right into it and just start off with asking you, what inspired you to become an educator?
So I come from a long line of educators. My great-grandfather was the principal, teacher, and bus driver at a small elementary school in Mesquite, Texas. And his son, my grandfather, always instilled in us how important education was. He was an educator. My grandmother was an educator. My mother, my aunt, my father.
Wow.
So we're all a bunch of teachers. I originally went to school to be a doctor. I went pre-med, and that didn't work out. When I failed my first bio exam, my mom was like, maybe you should try education. And my professor was amazing. She was so full of energy. And I realized that that's what I wanted to do, was somebody who made people feel happy and encouraged and validated when they walked into a space. And so that's how it all started.
Okay, and so you are the Tutu Teacher. So
Yes.
Tell me about the tutu. Explain that to me.
So I'm originally from Texas. And when I met my now husband, but then boyfriend, soon after we met, we moved to Massachusetts. And I had lived my whole life in Texas. And so I'd never been away from friends and family like that, out of state. And so I had 6 years of teaching under my belt. And I went in thinking like, oh, okay, I've got these great ideas, but I also, I'm willing to learn. I'm in a new space. And when I would talk with my grade level, I got a lot of the like, oh, we don't do this here. The like, just wait till you get more accustomed. The like very nice way to shut me up kind of thing. And so I struggled a lot with feeling like I was a part of a group. I was a part of a space that like really truly validated my ideas and welcomed, my perspective. In October, the school has a parade for Halloween and the kids walk around and families are there. And I decided I was going to wear a tutu and like butterfly wings and walk around with the kids. And for some reason, I don't know if it's because there was, everyone was around or it was just a time to be silly and fun. It let the tutu, the outfit, the costume just kind of let me put my like guard down and just be the person I've always been, which is silly and fun and engaging. And so after that, I was like, well, what if I wear a tutu for Thanksgiving or one for winter? And then it just kind of like spiraled out of control. So that's where the moniker comes from. It's really just a way to remember that who you are is good enough, you know?
Yeah, and I love the way you've incorporated it. Like I've seen you do videos with tutus in the background, and so you brought it into your digital presence, which I love.
Yeah.
But I have a couple more questions about sort of even before you got into the digital presence. You credited in one of the videos I saw, you credited Black women a lot for sort of your trajectory and the way and the course that you took in becoming a teacher. You mentioned your family. Is it Black women in your family? Is it other Black women? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. So that professor I mentioned, Marcia Gathron, is a Black woman. And so she helped validate that this was the right path for me. Of course, my family line is full of Black women. I was raised by a single Black mother. And so I learned the value and the strength of a Black woman's voice from a very young age. And so when I went to college and, decided to become an educator, I didn't see a lot of Black women in my profession outside of my family. And so I didn't have a opportunity to learn directly from a Black educator as a pre-service educator. But once I finally was established, I started to also learn that there were Black educators who had been doing amazing work this entire time, but weren't credited or weren't talked about. So, we learn about Piaget, but I didn't learn about Regine Sims Bishop until further into my career as an educator. And so when I sought out how I could better understand the value of literacy as it relates to underrepresented, marginalized groups, then it was all of these Black women, particularly, who came to the forefront and had already been doing this work, but no one was really talking about it. Not like I brought it to the forefront, but no one was talking about it at all, even when I was in school. And so I continued to put Black women on a pedestal because I believe that's where we belong. But I also believe that when we say things like books can be mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, and we just leave that thought in the air without saying, because Regine Sims Bishop told us that, you kind of begin to dismiss their work. And so I really try to put Black women's work to the forefront, but also just saying their names just helps people remember that like these ideas are great. They mostly came from Black women. The reason why you're hearing about things now is because a Black woman probably had enough of it and finally spoke up, and that's why it's coming to the forefront. So Black women are, they always say, listen to Black women and the world will be a better place. I believe it.
Yeah. And now this Black woman is, we're listening to her. We're listening to her on her social channels. We're listening to her, on YouTube and in interviews and in now advertising campaigns I've seen you in, like with JC Penney and stuff. So
yeah.
Tell me about that public presence and what was your vision and your real goal in sort of being public facing, on digital platforms like that?
Yeah. So nothing I thought in the beginning was what I am experiencing now. I could have never imagined this shift. I started a account when I moved from Texas to Massachusetts because I wanted my family and friends to just kind of see the things we were doing, the places we were going in this new space. But simultaneously, teachers on social media were now using Instagram in a way that they had never before. And so while I was just sharing like, we went to this Oktoberfest or we went to the museum, we were also starting to share, here are the books we're reading in our classroom. Here are the, anchor charts we're using. And so simultaneously, it became how I'm sharing my normal day-to-day life and teaching life. And then it became, what were the books we were reading? Because when I moved to Massachusetts, I was the English language teacher for the grade level. And I had students who spoke Hebrew, Russian, German, Japanese, Korean. I had over, 8 languages in my classroom at one time other than English. And so then I use social media to be like, does anyone have any recommendations for books that represent, our Jewish families, books that represent our Arab family? Like, where can we find these books? Now, at the time, there were few and far between. But social media became, for me, a space to talk about the missing stories in our classroom libraries. But again, I was just a person experiencing things along with everyone else. There was really no purpose or intent until I could kind of find a niche. And as a child of an English teacher, books were always something that centered my understanding of the world. And so then books became a niche for me in the sense of searching for books that really helped kids feel seen in the classroom, or their stories that they never knew about could show up in our classroom library. And then we moved to New York. And in that transition to Brooklyn, I think I had really solidified myself as somebody who continued to try to find and celebrate books that serve diverse populations. And in that time, I also was approached about, not that I wouldn't claim that I'm an anti-racist, anti-bias teacher. I am a person who is continually working through ensuring that I am anti-racist and anti-bias in my actions. But that became a huge point of interest for people who their first time seeing racism so overtly was when George Floyd was murdered. And so when he was murdered, people started to seek out others, mainly Black creators, who were already talking about the injustices, the inequities. And so that was a huge uptick in people who sought my voice out for specifically books, and the ways that you can build books as a segue for important conversations, either at home or in the classroom.
Yeah, and I that's actually a really important thing that I saw is that you had a YouTube video that kind of went viral. Can you tell me a little bit about that, and what was your purpose in doing that? What was your message?
Yeah. So after George Floyd was murdered, we were all teaching virtually because it was the height of COVID. And I know that if we were in person after he had been murdered, we would have sat at the, carpet. We would have all come together, the kids and I, and we would have talked about it. And I would have been very honest with them about the way I was feeling and what I saw on the news. In a way that was appropriate for kindergarten students, to understand. But I didn't have that. I didn't have the privilege to be close to them. And so I was dealing with understanding that this huge injustice happened. And I knew that it was affecting me specifically as a Black woman, that I had to talk to my kids. So I read Julius Lester's book, Let's Talk About Race. And I opened a conversation about the importance to talk about inequity and talk about race. It's not a bad thing to call somebody Black. It isn't a bad thing to talk about skin color, and urging kids to use their voice to speak up. And I only did it for my kids, my students. That was all that video was for. But my husband said, you would probably want to share that online because there might be other teachers who are struggling, specifically white teachers who don't know what to say. Because that's a thing that I think we found a lot of after he was murdered was white people were being honest and saying, like, I don't talk about race because I don't know what to say. I'm afraid to say the wrong things. So I shared it. And that's when, we had this viral outreach. And as a result, the You Have a Voice book that I wrote came directly from the words that I used in that video. My friend Rhoda Ahmed has a publishing company, and she encouraged me to turn the words of that video into a children's book.
Was that your first children's book?
Yes.
Yeah. We'll get more into your books in a little bit, but I'm really sort of interested in that moment. How did people respond largely to that messaging?
Yeah, I think whenever you have somebody, and usually a person of color, talking about race, you get both ends of the spectrum. And so I got so many people who were very appreciative, very much happy that now they had a way to at least invite conversation in their classrooms or their homes. And then the other end was like, I don't deserve to be a teacher, and people threatening to call my principal and having me fired or removed from the classroom because, well, a lot of people don't believe, racism exists or that it's my place to talk to kids about that. So the stupid anger stuff that's grounded in hate seems to kind of water on a duck's back with me, but it doesn't not affect me. Like there are the tinges of pain I get from it's the imposter syndrome. Like, really, should I really be talking about this? Maybe I'm not the right voice, or maybe the way I said something wasn't right, or the timing, all of those things flicker in your head. But I try to remember that it's for the kids. Like the kids now, hopefully, feel like they could ask questions around race, or they could bring up ways in which they'll speak up for others just because we had the conversation, where before we're sweeping things under the rug. We're not, we're hushing questions that kids have that are helping them process the world around them.
Have you heard examples from people who may have used your video as a sort of springboard to talk about their students, of how that's helped, and have there been good conversations that have happened with kids?
Yeah, there's been so many positive, at least relate to me, ways in which teachers have sparked conversations with their own students that I think allowed them to just be not a vessel, but like a participant in an open conversation, where I think teachers, sometimes we hinder ourselves, is that we always feel like we have to be this fountain of information and just like constantly telling kids about the world. And sometimes kids have I know when I was 6 years old, I easily had representation of racism to share with the class. And so if we let kids talk about these things, we could bring it to their attention. But giving them the space to have the conversation, a lot of teachers felt like they heard their kids say something new, or they were able to direct a conversation in a way that they weren't before, or kids who had questions because at home they're hearing something else, they were able to process this with them, and not to say that families are doing it wrong, but their kids have questions, and school is a place where that they should feel like any question is acceptable to ask.
Absolutely. And and that brings us back to the sort of larger conversation. Obviously, the video that you created was about a specific thing, a specific event that happened. But, then we talk about the larger conversation of representation and representation in books. And that's really sort of what you try to drive home with your social platforms. Did you feel like you saw the representation in books growing up? And from now till then, do you see progress?
Yeah, so I'm 40. So the books that I read growing up did not have as many opportunities to see, myself. I think of Corduroy by Don Freeman, because the little girl's a Black girl. She's shopping with her mom. That's definitely an experience I've had. But then it's like few and far between, really. And so even when I was a first-year teacher, there still weren't that many, especially when I was teaching in Austin, Texas at a dual language school. We didn't have a lot of books that were bilingual and or just in Spanish of high quality, both in vocabulary and content. So we didn't have a lot even for our students who speak other languages to feel like they got, substantial stories.
Right.
But now, almost 20 years later, I definitely feel that there's been so many ways that people's stories are being told. And it's been exciting because I can't think of a ton of identities outside my own sometimes. And so when a new book comes up, I'm like, oh, I never knew that was a book that somebody needed, because it might not be my own story. Somebody recently shared stories about children who have feeding tubes. And it was such a and there were more than 2 books. And I was so amazed to see that not only can we think about kids with disabilities, but we can narrow it down to the specific disability and help kids normalize the conversation around you might see someone with a feeding tube. This is what it does for them. And I think that's the goal, is that, 9 times out of 10, people look like they're going through life with without varying disabilities or ways of thinking or ways of praying or ways of loving. But when we dig deeper and expose the stories and identities of each other, there's so much to celebrate and talk about. And that, beyond the what book banners might say, that's what we're getting to. We're getting to the opportunity for a kid to say, oh my gosh, that's like me, or I had no idea. And it's not to shame or punish, it's to celebrate everyone's story.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have 2 Instagram channels, it looks like, the Tutu Teacher and then Diverse Reads. How do you see those as different? What are and they both have a significant following, so good work there. But how do you see those as different?
Yeah, so the Tutu Teacher, I share teaching stuff and typically picture books. The Diverse Reads became a way for me to share middle grade and YA, because I also think there are so many great stories there, but I was overwhelmed with the ability to share everything on one account. And so I try to separate the two by kind of like grade level or, media type. But it still is very overwhelming to run 2 accounts. Diverse Reads gets neglected a lot.
Well, I mean, look, it's a lot of work. So I'm impressed that you're even, manning 2 channels on top of a website, on top of, I think you have a Facebook as well, and I don't know what else.
Yeah.
But actually, to be successful on some of these channels is not just about what you're saying, but it's how you're saying it. Social media, especially Instagram, sometimes requires a little bit of creativity. What are some of the creative things that you do to get people excited about books?
Yeah, that is always a struggle, because I think attention span has decreased over time. And people want the hook. They want to feel like they're being paid attention to, or this is something they can buy into. So for me, that can be overwhelming to constantly be thinking about how am I going to make this work for a small group of people. And what I've tried to do is repetitive ideas or formations of an idea, because sometimes they're not fully thought out. So I do on Tutu Teacher, I do this books badly explained. Yeah. And so I'll give a line of a book that's pretty well known, but it's just explained badly. And you have to guess the book based on this bad explanation, and then swipe and you can see the reveal. And that's been fun, because I think it gives us a little nostalgia. They're usually books that are 20 years old or older. But it's also a great way to like remember books to pull into your classroom. So yes, we've seen an increase in books that celebrate, different groups, but there are still some really solid books that we can always turn to. Um, and then another thing I try to do is called book in 60 seconds. So you can see the highlights, the deeper dive into some of the picture books that, not everyone has access to a local library. Not everyone has access to a local bookstore. And so it gives people a chance to see a book a little bit more clearly rather than, a small image on some online store. And so those are a couple of ways that I've tried to be creative, but it also works for me because it's a routine and a formula that I know like has seen success. So those are two that I just keep doing.
Okay, that's awesome. And now let's talk about like some of the things that you now like that you're publishing. So first of all, what inspired you to begin writing your own books?
So I did not think I'd ever be an author. If it wasn't for, Rhoda pushing me to do You Have a Voice, I could honestly say I don't know if I would have written a book. Um, it just wasn't something that I thought about deeply. I love listening to stories. I love being someone who, does a great read aloud, but I don't think necessarily about the process of writing as a medium of joy for me. I don't really even enjoy teaching writing as an educator. So it's always just kind of been a like, I'd rather not. Um, so when I wrote this book, or You Have a Voice, and it was not as hard as I thought it would be in the sense of like there were ideas there and I could get it on paper. Um, it it was like, oh, okay, maybe you can do this. And shortly after, I was approached to write rebellious read alouds. Like you mentioned, there was a large following of people who saw the work I was doing in talking about these, really great books about representation. And one of those people was an editor at Corwin, and she approached me with the idea of like, you are already talking about books and how to have conversations with kids. How do we turn that into something for teachers, at read aloud time to pull out this book and have 3 to 5 conversations with kids? And so that's what Rebellious Read Alouds became, is a grouping of lessons around different picture books so that teachers could start conversations with young people to just help them perceive and understand the world better. And then it kind of just snowballed from there, honestly.
You brought up rebellious read alouds,
Mm-hmm.
and that was one of the things that actually interested me. And thank you for nicely explaining what it is. But tell me about that word rebellious, because I could see potentially people saying, well, what does rebellious mean? And it had a negative connotation, but I think that this is very much a positive connotation. So tell me what you mean by
Yeah.
rebellious.
My hope is the latter. Like you mentioned, I hope somebody feels that rebellion is a powerful way to take what is right, what belongs to you. And sometimes that's a story. Sometimes that's, access to certain things. When we announced the name Rebellious Read Alouds, there was one woman, and I will never forget it because I was so angry. She's like, it's not rebellious to read these books. That's the right thing to do. And she's right. But I was so mad because, we really were thoughtful in choosing rebellious read alouds because, as we see with book bannings, it is an act of rebellion, like you mentioned, in a good way, to say, I am acknowledging that these stories need to be told and kids need to have these conversations. And in that way, I'm rebelling against everything we've been taught that says a family is a mom and a dad and a kid, or love is between two heterosexual people, or the right way to pray is this way, or the right way to speak a language is this way. That's what we're rebelling against, the white Eurocentric norm. That's the rebellion. And so while, yes, it's not rebellious because you should be doing this. This is best practices regardless. But it is still a rebellion because that is not what we're told is the norm. We're not told that's the right thing, even though many of us know it to be true.
Yeah, it sounds like her hang up on the word rebellion was assuming that rebellion meant wrong, right? You're saying
right.
It's the right thing to do, so it shouldn't be called rebellion, but rebellion often is the right thing to do. Right.
Exactly.
So, and that's why I brought up that question because I completely understood why you said that, but I could imagine that some people might, it might cause people to stop. And sometimes that's a good thing, right? So for people to see a word and to say, wait, what am I about to experience? What does this mean? What is the depth of this word? And so I actually appreciate the use of the word rebellion. But that actually brings me to another question, because you talked about sort of the initial reactions to your video after George Floyd, and you sort of addressing your classroom, and then it going to a larger audience. Shout out to your husband for pushing that forward, and like you mentioned that somebody said to you, or I don't know if it was a person or several people, oh, they threatened to I guess tell your administration. Was there ever any pushback from administration on things like that?
No, and I actually, because I knew that feelings were heightened on all sides after George Floyd was murdered. I did send it to my admin before sending it to families, my own families and caregivers, and they responded with absolutely send it, which I knew they would. I just wanted to be sure they knew this was going out to families, because you have the best intentions, right? That's what I think is so hard with being a person who understands what's right, like in terms of justice, in terms of inequality, like understanding what's right. You still have the best hope, but you never know, right? And so that never know, I just wanted that kind of assurance that my admin, at least they knew this was going out. And if they had any misgivings about it, this was their time to say something, but regardless, it was going to go out.
Yeah, I love that. Rebellious.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what's next for you? I think you've been still writing. I've seen since that initial book, The Rebellious Read Alouds. What else is coming?
Yeah, so in August, I completed my librarian degree. So I have hopes to become a school librarian. That would be the ultimate goal. I live in a state that doesn't value school librarians right now, so we'll see. But I just finished a book in a series that will be out in 2024 about, it's called Getting Ready. And it's about how kids get ready for different experiences. So the first two in the series are getting ready for pre-K and getting ready for kindergarten. We'll have one about getting ready for first grade. I think that comes out in 2025. But they're just different kids who are experiencing school, and it's just kind of like a walkthrough through what their day might look like and who might be there. The second picture book I wrote was called Kindergarten. And that was a story about a little boy named Leo, who is introverted and shy and very quiet. And he's about to have his first day of school, and he just doesn't feel very ready. He doesn't feel like he can live up to his teacher's idea of what it means to show and be kind in kindergarten. And then there's a follow-up to that called Look How Much I've Grown in Kindergarten. And that comes out in March of 2024, where we look at Mason, who is not ready. She's already in school. This is like mid-year. And her friends are reading. They can write their name. They can tie shoes. She can't do that. And she's feeling really stuck because her growth doesn't look like everyone else's.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I really could have used the getting ready for pre-K with my 1-year-old. I mean, my 1-year-old, my 3-year-old.
Yeah.
I don't know why I said 1-year-old,
Yeah.
3-year-old. But he just started. Maybe I'll get the getting ready for kindergarten.
Yeah.
But one thing I did notice, and I think that you're sort of speaking to this, is like gifts come in so many different ways. Like I think my kid is really he's reading, he's doing really well. And yet there are other things that clearly other kids are better at than him, right? And I think that I've really been humbled because I came from a background where academics were everything.
Right.
And I'm glad to see that my son is doing academically well in terms of reading so far. It's pre-K 3, but he's reading well. But I've also come to appreciate when I've seen other kids. Like there was another kid, we saw him at the park, and this kid he was on his bike, 2-wheel bike, 3 years old, just whipping around. And I was like, my kid barely can make his way on like one of the big wheels, So I was like, it's just so I can appreciate that you're writing one, that you talk about the differences and you're pushing these differences and understanding the differences and the light in different kids. And I can see why that would be important for a kid. I look at my son, and maybe I didn't really recognize what you said about like, the diversity that I may or may not have seen in my, I do recognize that I didn't see that much diversity, but like I now am realizing more all the different types of diversity there are, and all the different ways that people, that kids' lights shine. And I've seen that in my own life, but I'm seeing it reflected in what you're doing. And I just have to say, I appreciate that. Thank you. So thank you for the work that you're doing. And the last thing I have to ask you is, where can we find you? What channels, website, whatever it is?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, because I do think that kids show up ready the way they are, and we should value them at the point they are. Like, yes, there's growth to be made, but again, growth looks different for everybody. I just really think that kids are ready as they are and are worthy as they are. So you can find me. I'm on almost all the social media channels. I'm just not necessarily good at keeping up with all of them, which is, everyone's story, I feel like. But mostly the Tutu Teacher throughout. TikTok. I'm not on X any longer, but Instagram for sure, and Facebook. And that's my website too, thetututeacher.com.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much again. And
thank you so much.
Yeah, and keep doing the work that you're doing. I will continue following you and what you're doing.
Thank you.
And telling everybody who will listen about the work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Reclaimed Personas. If you want more, please subscribe. And remember, keep claiming your space and your story.